One of the things that I teach in my grief healing program is that there are so many facets to grief. We know for a fact there are 45 or more known losses that a griever can experience in their heart and in their soul. And from my own personal experience, I always go back to the beginning. And I believe one of those absolute first grieving experience relationships that we have, whether living or deceased, is always with the parent. And so I have an amazing guest here today, and we're going to take a deep dive into the father-child relationship, which I am so excited to get this on. This is Gigi. Gigi. Am I saying it right?
Gigi.
Gigi. I wrote it wrong. Gigi. I love her name. It's so beautiful. Gigi Denar. And she is an author and a motivational speaker, and just really going to bring us some great insight into our heart with our fathers. Welcome to the show, my love.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I am so excited to be here. I think there's so much synergy in what we do, and I really appreciate this opportunity.
And I don't think people give enough grace and awareness to how we are actually formed by our relationships with our parents and how that sets the trajectory of our life. So what I'd like you to do is introduce yourself to our friends, tell them who you are and how you came about absolutely going after this subject, which is life-changing.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am so glad to be here. And yeah, sometimes we choose a path, and I think sometimes a path chooses us. And that's kind of how I feel about this. I am an author, speaker, counselor. I help people in this place of healing and father-child relationships that was really born out of my own experience. I mean, I've been writing and speaking like forever. So somewhere I knew that that was a part of my wiring, who I am, what I do. I loved writing as a child. I was an orator in high school. I did debate in college. I mean, it's the speaking and writing has always been sort of a part of me, but I didn't really know that it would merge with this experience that I had out of my own father child relationship. So maybe I can start there and tell you a little
Please.
bit how it just kind of wound up in my lap, literally. So I actually grew up without my father. So I didn't know my dad. I knew his name. I knew a few fun facts about him, just a few. Generally speaking, we did not speak of him. My mother never said anything negative about him. It was just more a void. Uh, I think around the age of 10, I asked a question one day. You know, kids interpret stuff wrong all the time because they don't know what's going on in their parents' head. But I asked a question about him. She snapped at me, and I read that as, okay, this is a taboo subject. So I stopped asking. So from 10 until the age of 14, it was just kind of like something in the background. But it was always with me, this longing, this desire, this feeling that I've got to know my father was always there. And I didn't have anywhere to go with that. I had no one to talk to about that. Um, so I was at my aunt's house. So this is kind of a little weird. My mother's sister married my father's first cousin who had grown up together. And I was sitting at her house one day, I was 14, and out of the blue, just totally random, I said, I always wanted a brother named Ricky and a brother named Mickey, just out of nowhere. And she looks at me and she just like blanches. And I'm like, that was weird. And then her face kind of changed with this kind of resolve. And she says, well, you do have a brother named Ricky and you have a sister named Mickey. And we both almost fell out of the chair. And she decided from that day forward that she was going to introduce me to my father's father by phone because her son, who is my first cousin, is also my second cousin, and we share that grandfather. So she called him. And for 2.5 years, I had this clandestine phone relationship with my paternal grandfather.
Wow.
So then fast forward to senior year in high school, I got up the nerve and one day said to my mother very quickly, is it okay if I invite my father to my high school graduation? To which she paused and then said, I don't care if you can find him. But what she didn't know was that I had been talking to my grandfather. So that was my plan. My plan was send the graduation to my grandfather, the invitation, and he'll send it to my father wherever he is. So that's what I did. Now, later on, I found out that they were actually not speaking, but he sent it anyway.
Wow.
So my first contact with my father was actually the night before graduation, which was the day he received the invitation. And he called us. And I was the person who happened to pick up the phone. And he said, may I please speak to Kay or Gigi? Kay was my mother's name. And I said, this is Gigi. Unfamiliar man's voice. You know, what do I know? It's graduation. It could be anybody, you know. And then he says, this is Mr. Deadweiler, which is my dad's last name. But I knew it was not my grandfather's voice. So now I'm a little freaking and I say, which Mr. Deadweiler? And then there was this long pause and he goes, this is Bobby. This is your father. And then I lost it. I
Mhm.
had no words, no nothing. I literally, it was like I was frozen. Tears were streaming down my face. I could not speak. He's on the other end of the phone going, Gigi, Gigi. And now I'm freaking because I think he's going to hang up. Right. And I'm like, no, okay, we can't do that. So I run in the living room. I find my mother who was talking to relatives and she's ignoring me. And I'm kind of hitting her arm. And then she looks down and she sees tears streaming down my face. And she's like, Gigi, what is it? You know, and I just kind of shoved the phone, you know, those old portables. I shoved the phone in her hand and she, you know, picks up the phone. She's like, hello. And then she says, oh, I think
Yeah.
she's just a little overwhelmed. And that's all I remember. I slipped out from under her arm. I went and buried myself in the bed and cried. And my father came to visit me that July. This was like the end of May. And I remember absolutely nothing between that night and the day he came to visit.
Wow.
Like it's blank. Like I don't remember anything about those 2 months. And
Wow.
then the day he came to visit, it was like a whole new thing happened in my life and world. Um, so he came to visit. I was really nervous because I wasn't sure how my mother would treat him. Uh, so it was nerve-wracking all night, getting through dinner, waiting for her to do something that was going to embarrass me or hurt me or whatever. And she did it. So I was like, okay, so far so good. And then about 11 o'clock, she said, okay, I'll leave you two at it. And he and I stayed up and played chess and talked till 4 o'clock in the
Wow.
morning.
Wow. Now, let me ask you this.
Yes.
At You've done so much research on the father-child
Yeah.
relationship. At any point, did you ever identify this as a grieving experience?
I think I did at some level. I think even as a child, I was very aware that I missed my dad in ways that I could not understand.
Yeah.
Like, how do you miss somebody you've never met?
Yeah.
But I was aware of a sadness that kind of I carried.
Yeah.
So I was aware it was there, but again, didn't have anywhere to express that.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened, which kind of freaked me out, I mean, I was surprised at the strength of my reaction, which pointed to some grief, was my mom had been dating this guy, probably the only guy she ever dated I ever liked. Because he really liked me, you know, it was genuine interest and care in me. And we were really close. And he would come hang out with me, take me to the ocean, come buy my dog gigantic bags of dog food. And we sit and talk. He would really listen. And then one day, I think I was like 13, and he came and he called me his daughter, and I was angry.
Mm.
I was so angry. And my reaction surprised me. It surprised him too. It hurt him. And I could not at that time explain why. But I was so angry that I would not talk to him for a long time. And I was like, what on earth is wrong with you? Like intellectually, that didn't make any sense to me, but there was such a strong, real emotional reaction.
Yeah.
Well, in college, God is so funny. In college, it got revealed in a writing assignment. I was a journalism major, and we had to write some story. I don't remember the exact instruction, but I do remember the piece I wrote. And in the writing of it, I understood why I was angry. And the piece ended up being called Shoes Too Empty to Fill.
Wow.
And I understood that until I got a chance to meet my father for real, no one could take that spot.
Yeah.
Like that was reserved for him somewhere whenever it happens. And don't anybody talk to me about that until I get that chance.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely, I love that. The reason that I also wanted to do this interview with you is because there are so many times that grievers come to me, and this is not actually a question, I'm just making a statement, but they don't realize that the absent father is absolutely a grieving experience. So someone may come to me for they lost their kitty, or they lost their child, or their spouse has just died, and we start talking. And then this father-child relationship all of a sudden appears in this grief work, and they
Yes,
didn't even put the connection together.
correct.
And so that's the reason that I really want to go on from here. And so people can hear this and understand
Yes.
it. So from that part, where did you guys decide to go next?
So my dad and I meet. There were so many layers of loss in this. It's not just a, singular kind of thing. It wasn't just that the loss of a physical presence.
Yeah.
It was the loss of a part of who I am.
Yes.
It was a loss of me. So meeting my dad was so crazy because I am so much like him. I looked just like my mother. I was so much not like my mother. It confused me. I used to feel like, how in the world can I possibly be this woman's child? Like, this makes no sense. Because somewhere I think kids tend to think that you ought to be like a parent somehow. And since that was the only parent I knew, I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
So it was almost like you didn't fit into this world. Like,
Correct.
how do I get these puzzle pieces don't match?
Don't match.
Yeah.
I actually created a story around it that I tell people now. They're all deceased, so nobody's feelings will get hurt. But my mother's youngest sister and I were very close. We also looked a lot alike. So my story in my head was that, okay, what happened was she had me out of wedlock. And because my mom got married, they just gave me to them. You know, that was the story. Before I met my dad,
I
that
have
was
to tell you something. One of the things that I teach when I'm talking about children in grief is that
uh-huh.
if you do not fill in the blanks for your kids,
Correct.
they are going to fill in the
Yes.
blanks themselves. And I tell
Yes.
this really simple story that my sister Erica laughs about all the time, is that I am African American, but my skin is very fair. There
Uh-huh.
was an African American family that lived across the street. That mom always bought wheat bread.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm fair skinned. I was a little tiny girl, and I
Uh-huh.
just assumed that I was white because my skin was so fair. My parents never talked about it. My parents bought white bread, and I put in my head that black people ate brown bread and white people ate white bread. And I was 5 years old. But, and I say that as the simplest way that I can explain. If
Yes,
you do not fill in the blanks, your
yes,
kids are going to fill in the blanks for themselves,
exactly. And that's exactly what I did. I created a story to find a place of belonging.
which has to do connection to the father-child relationship.
Yes, yes. And so I never told anybody. It was just this thing in my head that I went around with all the time. And in high school, my aunt was actually the librarian at my school. And so there were people who sometimes thought she was my mom, which didn't bother me. Ooh, but it created a lot of tension in my mom and her sister's relationship, though. So, uh, so all of that's going on in the background. You know, there's this tension between my relationship with my aunt, which is very close, this relationship that is not close with my mother, that's kind of visible to everybody in the family. Like, it's not a secret. We don't really talk about it until usually there's a crisis, but everybody's aware, you know. And so I meet my dad and I met myself. One of the first things that we discovered was that we wrote just alike. I read a piece that he'd written and I was like, oh my God, I could have written this. And that's kind of how this began. My father also was a minister. So this combination of writing, ministry, and stuff like that, we had a desire to like do stuff together at some point. Now, this evolved, over time.
Yeah.
These conversations we would have, and I would see him whenever I could, and that kind of stuff. It was complicated. He had another wife. He had two small children. I had older siblings, younger siblings. It was, really messy
Yeah.
going on in the
Yeah.
background. So also trying to navigate through that, so now I've got the loss of a dad. I've also got the loss of siblings, right?
Yeah.
Siblings that I've never had the benefit of knowing
Yeah.
and growing up with. And so, and then there's in some regards, I think I started feeling a loss of the brother that I did grow up with because we didn't have this shared experience.
Right.
In fact, he never got to know his father, even though they lived in the same town for a long time. And so I even felt awkward, like talking about my experience because I am now having this wonderful relationship with my father. It was complicated, a
Yes.
lot of stuff going on. And so my dad and I ended up deciding it would be cool, just a cool idea, because of our writing styles, if we wrote our stories and intersected them together, like in something, where it's just like you tell your story, I tell my story, and see how where they meet, right? So that's how it began. We wrote this piece. It wasn't very long, and but I started sharing it with people. Every time I shared it, it seemed to be very impactful for people. Like it resonated with people in a really deep way. People were crying. I was like, wow, what in the world? I had a roommate at one point. She was teaching a class at university in Berkeley, and she had me come and read it to her class. And so there are all these like young adults in this class crying. And I'm like, oh my God, what on earth is going on here? So I knew it had potential. My father was involved a lot in prison ministry. I met some other people who felt like they thought that would really minister a lot to people in prison. So I was like, hey, sure, share the story. And then I shared it with a professor who had been kind of like a surrogate father to me in college. We kept in touch. I came to visit him and he said, if you like got some other people's stories and added to this, could be a pretty powerful book. So it was really his idea that began all of this. And I was like, huh, okay. 10 years later, I mean, I didn't jump on it or anything. 10 years later, the book emerged. And right after I published, so let me go back. When I started writing the book, I mean, I knew I could write, but I'd not written a book. Not really. I'd published a cookbook, but I hadn't written a book like this. So funny. And I felt like I should try to get somebody to endorse it. And the people's names who came to mind did not make sense to me. I was like, these people don't know me from Adam. That is crazy. Like, why on earth would they support some random chick who wrote this book? But I followed the witness. So I reached out and found Dr. Ken Canfield, who is the founder of the National Center for Fathering. I
Wow.
hunted him down. He was no longer there. I hunted him down, found him at this place called Impact in LA, wrote to him, told him, asked him if he would consider endorsing my book. He does respond. He writes me back and he's like, do I know you? No. Do you work with Impact? No. And he's like, I don't really usually do that, with people that I don't know and not connected. He goes, having said that though, I really like your writing. Then he asked me a couple of questions. He asked me, was there a call to action? I said yes. And he asked me, was there a spiritual component? I said yes. They're at the end of the book, and I'm happy to send you those very, very, very rough drafts of those chapters if you don't mind reading a rough draft. I'd only sent him the intro at that point. And so I'd sent it to him. He contacted me back and he goes, you'll have an endorsement by the end of the week. So that was
Wow.
miracle number one. I was like, you have got to be kidding me.
I want to go back just a little bit.
Okay.
So we just glossed over that is amazing. That's amazing. Well, it just tells me that this book was meant to be here.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
was meant to change the lives that it's going to change. Because I can
Correct.
only imagine the amount of stories of people that wanted to get in this book that all have a story, right?
Right.
One of the things that I've learned definitely from doing this grief work is we all have a story.
Yes.
We all have a story. And all of those
Absolutely.
stories aren't pretty.
Correct.
And they aren't wrapped with pink bows.
Right.
And they just are mostly painful.
Yeah.
When you read the story between you and Dad,
Uh-huh.
were there connections? Were there times where you guys crossed paths? Were there times where you were like, oh, that's why I do that? What were the ahas?
Wow. There were some ahas. Most of the ahas came in the depths of our likeness, from types of music we liked to, I come from a family of musicians. My mother was a singer, but did primarily like classicals and spirituals. My dad and I like jazz. He played saxophone. Um, we both had like this weird kind of fascination with reading books about death. It was just kind of like, yeah, a little macabre and weird, but okay, that might explain where I got that from. My dad was very, very streetwise. My mother was on the opposite end of that spectrum. Even though I was not allowed to be very much kind of in the streets, that was very comfortable for me. So when I would hang out with friends or relatives or whoever, that lived down in the projects, my mom would freak out about my even being in that environment, but it felt very easy for me, even though that was not the environment in which I was raised, right? So this streetwise proclivity that I seem to have inherited from him, became evident sort of in our writings. And so it was, even the guys that I dated and some of the stuff that I got into in terms of, I don't even know if you call them romantic, but boy girl relationships, I look back and think that, yeah, that probably had a lot more to do with him than I could really kind of see and explain.
Yeah.
Like, why would you date guys like that so far from what the environment you were brought up in? Which also disturbed my mother. She would be like, why do you have to find them? Like, how do you find them? Like, this is so weird. Like, you could just as well be like with any doctor, lawyer, Indian chief you want to be with. And yet, you date the bad boy who, does something weird in his after hours, work or whatever. So I don't know. Those were things that kind of showed up immediately.
In that. And the
Yeah.
DNA is no joke.
Yeah. No joke.
It is no joke. Like
Yeah.
that stuff came strongly through the DNA. Okay,
Yeah.
so next question. When Mom got up from the table at 11 o'clock that night,
Uh-huh.
Did she say, okay, this is now a relationship between you and dad and allow the healing to take place? Or did she put restrictions on it?
She didn't put any restrictions on it. There were complications that we probably don't want to get into in this
No, that's
time
okay.
because
I just wanted to
it'll
know how
take
that
us
went.
down another line. But no, she didn't put restrictions on it. I think that whatever reservation she had, because she actually forbade him to see me. So that was another part of the healing process.
Yeah.
Um, that took longer for me to get to. But yeah, so I knew that his desire was to see me. He even had tried to get intel from his cousin that was married to my sister, but everybody was afraid of my mom. My mother was a
Mm,
force.
yeah.
So people were like, yep, nope, not getting in that. Yeah,
Not touching that.
sorry.
Definitely not
Yeah,
touching that.
yeah.
So, um, you and dad did a grief healing sessions,
Many
multiple
sessions.
sessions. Yes.
Yeah, over
So what you
years.
did was you actually healed in life in real time your relation
Yes,
and your
yes,
broken hearts and your
yes.
longing for each other. Wow, that is so so amazing and so beautiful.
And having to experience each other's,
Yes.
because his was a different than what I felt, but clearly as important.
Yeah.
He would talk about, when we first started, sometimes it was hard for me. I was 17, right?
Yeah.
So at first it was hard for me to kind of deal with his stuff because I'm like, hey, I'm the kid here. But hearing his heart, sometimes he would talk to me and I would be like, okay, but see, I'm not 8.
Yeah.
So you can't go there with me like I'm 8 years old. And then he'd stop and he'd say, but I missed that. Like I never got a chance to hold you in my lap when you were 8. And I like he was saying, I don't know how to start at 17 either.
Yeah.
So but it was great because we talked it through. We had many, 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 and just like that, in the middle of whatever we were talking about, we would stop and talk about the dynamic in this conversation that we're having right now that I'm not really feeling good about and why. And then he could say, okay, and this is what I'm struggling with and why. So, yes, it was very real time.
And he had the wherewithal to do that, right?
Yes,
So, and here's the other thing, because and
that's a
probably
whole
his
nother
ministry
level.
background and his faith and all of that
Yeah,
led him to that.
yeah.
Because the average, I don't want to put people in a box, but there are a lot of men who
Who
struggle
would
with
not be able to do that.
to do the emotional growth part,
Correct.
not be able
Yes.
to communicate on that
Yeah,
level. But he
correct.
had the wherewithal to do that, which
Yeah.
also lent to the victory of you guys doing the grief healing real time.
Yes. And probably a lot more quickly than a lot of people get a chance to do it.
Yes.
I think that we
Yeah.
both, one, had the same sort of desire. We wanted to be close. And these were just hurdles we had to get over to get to that,
Yeah.
and we were both anxious to do that. So
Yeah.
I think that helped a great deal as well.
Was communication easy? Did it come easy?
Very.
Okay.
And so even in that, my dad was an orator. So that was another, I am like him in that way. And it made it easier
Yeah.
because we're both high end communicators.
Yeah. What struggles did he have, do you know, with the whole?
Um, I mean, so there was his own loss, this
Yeah.
grieving that he had for not seeing me all those younger years. I mean,
Yeah.
now when I after meeting my other siblings, like so some stuff I found out later, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I understood things in hindsight more than sometimes of the real time. We had the real time conversations, but there were pieces I couldn't put together. And after meeting my siblings, there was some tension with some of them, not with all of them. I'm still very close to my oldest brother. Um, And I couldn't kind of figure out like why would there be tensions with me? Like you don't know me,
Yeah.
you don't do anything to interview, what's the deal? Well, when I finally visited my dad at his home, I spent one Christmas with my father at age 25, the one and only time I ever spent Christmas with him. And that was at a fight with my mom. And I just said, I don't care. You guys can be upset or whatever. I have spent every Christmas of my life with you. This year, I am going to spend Christmas with my father, period. I've decided it's happening. So I did. I went to his home and I get to his house. My dad had a total of like 9 kids between 3 marriages, right? And an extra from in his first part of life. So he had pictures of like a picture, sort of everybody except me. He had this whole, like, what I called a shrine. He had newspaper articles that he had found. He had pictures. I don't even know how he got them. Me, I was the only kid that had like multiple items here. And I looked and I go, and you wonder why they don't like me.
But he was grieving.
I know that later, but
Yes,
the
he
moment
was
I
great. No, I get
realized,
that. I
oh
get
my
what you're saying. They're
God,
like,
what in the world?
so because one of the things we can do is bedevil or enshrine the person
Yes,
grieving. And so
yes,
he enshrined you
yes,
in his
most
grief.
definitely. Yes.
And did you call it grief back then?
No, not that part.
Yeah.
Not that part.
Oh.
No, I did not. I did not then. I did understand that later, but no, I didn't. I did not call it then. I was just like, oh my God, they hate me for a reason. Okay, I understand now. This is you doing. And even later, even after our father passed, well, a number of things happened with that. Like one of my sisters kind of totally, she wasn't mean to me, but she was definitely disengaged
Ah.
until after our father passed. And suddenly I show up and she's introducing me to people as her sister. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. Like all this time. Okay, I
Whoa.
did nothing and now I'm your sister. Okay. I know they had a lot of issues and so I did
Oh yeah.
understand the context. So I was like, wow, okay, so this is how this showed up here.
Layers and layers of grief.
Layers and
Layers and
layers.
layers.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me, I want to end this part one on
Okay.
how you and dad, you mended your relationship, and then I just heard you say that he passed.
Yeah.
How your relationship grew and became strong and united. And if it did, I just want to know.
Mhm.
And then for part two, we're going to talk about an absent father, whether through death, dying, or just being absent, changes the trajectory of your life.
Yeah.
100%. And so I'd like to get into that and
Okay.
why the father-child relationship is so important.
So
So,
important. Okay.
so show us how you guys evolved into what it evolved
Yeah,
into.
we just got closer and closer and closer. I mean, it got to the point where there was nothing that we could not talk about. Nothing.
Wow.
And even in the terms that I got a chance to minister to him in some other hurts, he had very, very deep, unresolved love for my mother.
Mm,
And since he was married, that created a whole nother world of problems.
mm,
And beyond that, his wife was aware of it, like acutely aware. In fact, I think the most shocking information he gave me, perhaps ever, was he told me that when the invitation came and he told her that he was coming to see us, her response was, are you coming back?
mm,
And frighteningly, his response was, I don't know.
mm,
So I was like, wow, okay, this is special. I don't even know. So at that point, that was early on. I found that part out early on the front end. I was like, I don't know. I'm only 17. I don't know how to deal with all of that. But as I got older and our, conversations continued to progress, I actually ended up kind of helping him release this not going to be satisfied, inordinate esteem that he had for my mom, because I could talk to him in ways that other people could not talk to him, for one thing. And I could just be really straight up with him and said, Dad, there's a word for that. It's idolatry. You need to let it go.
Yeah.
And he acknowledged it, but he
Yeah.
said he wasn't ready. And he was like, you just need to pray for me. And I said, I will. And I would say maybe 9, 10 months later or so, we were having a conversation, and he said, okay, so your prayers are working. And then we got to another place later on where we attended something together, and a retreat kind of thing with my church. And he was really excited, and he really had a good time. And at one point I had invited both of them, and I was like, I don't know what I was thinking. That was a bad idea, but she didn't end up coming. And he was saying that he was actually really glad, and that he had finally kind of felt free of that, and just, so it all the way till the end. We were very close. We talked regularly. I didn't see him as often as I liked. I was living in California toward the end for the last probably 10, 12 years of his life.
So you met him at 17. At what
Yes.
age do you say I found me? Was it that day?
I was about to say at least that week. Yeah,
That
I think
week.
that happened
Okay.
like really fast.
It happened really fast. Okay.
Yeah. But even, it was funny to watch other people's reactions to that.
Yeah.
Like my younger brother, with whom I got to be very close. Unfortunately, he also passed suddenly last year. But when we hung out, this might have been like, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago or so. So it was way after, our father had died, and he'd gone through a whole lot. But we were talking, and there were a lot of missing holes. Like my dad really kind of didn't explain a whole lot about the backdrop for me and him. Um, and so I was filling in gaps. And as I was talking to him, my brother was like, wow, you guys were so much alike, and so many things that we had in common, even the whole chess playing thing. I think I'm his only kid that played chess with him,
Wow.
that kind of stuff.
I picked up on that the first time. I was
Yeah,
like, that must have blown his mind to
yeah,
know that you were a chess player. Okay,
yeah.
so we're going to stop here, not for
Okay,
forever, but just for right
okay.
now. I want to say thank you so much for sharing your dad, your mom, your family, and the intimate details of your relationship with you and dad. Such a beautiful story. Friends, catch us for part 2 as we go a little bit deeper, take a deeper dive into the father-child relationship and how it absolutely can be the foundation of who you are, whether you're with them or not. So catch us for part 2, my friends. Thank you, friends.